The Enterprise, NCC-1701. No bloody A, not yet, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, or NX. Arguably, few starships embodied the spirit of exploration, scientific discovery, and when the need arose, might of the Federation Starfleet more than this legendary ship. Commissioned in 2245, the Enterprise, along with her Constitution-class sisters, were designed for supporting new colonies on the frontier, performing missions of scientific importance, and the exploration of the galaxy. The Enterprise's first captain was one Robert April, who stayed with her since her construction and throughout her first 5-year mission. After it ended, Captain Christopher Pike was brought in to begin a new 5-year mission of exploration and discovery. Not long after her second launch, the Enterprise would venture into the Talos system to respond to what turned out to be a fake distress signal created by the Talosians, a psionically powerful race that lured the Enterprise, and Captain Pike in particular, to the planet of Talos IV for the purpose of rebuilding their civilization. However, Pike and the Enterprise were eventually able to escape the Talosians and establish a quarantine zone around the system. Sometime after the Talos IV incident, the Enterprise would undergo a substantial refit that would change her appearance significantly from when she first launched, as she was outfitted with newer state-of-the-art technology before resuming her mission of exploration. Unfortunately, it was also around this time that the Federation-Klingon War of 2256 exploded onto the galactic stage, after the disastrous Battle of the Binary Stars. However, due to the Enterprise's mission taking her to the far edge of known space, Starfleet Command ordered her and the other Constitutions to stay out of the war and continue with their missions of exploration, with one of the rationales for this decision being that most were too far away to affect the war, and they would only be called upon as a final option. As such, the Enterprise's exploits during the war were non-existent, a fact that did not sit well with her crew, or her captain, or the audience, I bet. But the Enterprise would be called upon nonetheless to safeguard the existence of all life in the galaxy, against a rogue Section 31 AI simply known as Control, during what came to be known as the Battle near Zahia, where Captain Pike took part in the defense of the USS Discovery against rogue Section 31 ships, as she was preparing to time jump into the future to keep the ship away from Control, thus preventing the extinction of all sentient life in the galaxy. But not without a heavy cost. A large part of her saucer section was flat out destroyed in the battle, forcing her to undergo an extensive repair and refit. By 2259, the Enterprise, still under command of Captain Pike, resumed her mission of exploration until 2265, where somewhere along the line she underwent another refit to bring her back to her original appearance. This was also the end of an era, as Pike was promoted to fleet captain and assigned to another posting. The Enterprise's new skipper would be, of course, the renowned Captain James Tiberius Kirk, then Starfleet's youngest captain to ever sit in the big chair. Embarking on her next 5-year mission of exploration, the Enterprise would find herself in a wide variety of adventures, such as her fight with the aptly named Doomsday Machine, an automated ship of gargantuan proportions that had the power to destroy whole planets. Then there was her daring espionage mission into the Federation Romulan Neutral Zone, where Kirk and the crew stole a Romulan cloaking device so that the balance of power between the two rival governments could be maintained. But where one war may have been averted, another was soon to take shape, and the Enterprise found herself and her crew fighting the Klingons over the Organia system, as peace talks broke down between the Federation and the Empire, and open hostilities resumed. But this conflict did not last long, as the Enterprise was able to bear witness to the peace treaty forced upon them by the deceptively omnipotent Organian race, who inhabited the planet they were fighting over. And last, but certainly far from least, Kirk and the Enterprise stumbled upon the long-lost sleeper ship of Khan Noonien Singh, arguably the most reviled figure in Earth history due to his actions during the eugenics wars of the 20th century. After being resuscitated, he made a failed attempt to take over the Enterprise, which ended with Kirk exiling him and his followers to the planet of Ceti Alpha 5. Little did either man know, however, that both would live to regret this decision. Upon completion of Kirk's 5-year mission, the Enterprise returned to Earth for a complete overhaul of her systems and exterior, while Jim Kirk accepted a promotion to Rear Admiral. command of the Enterprise would be given to Captain Willard Decker, who oversaw the refit. The design of the Enterprise, and by extension the Constitution class, followed the same basic principles seen since the earliest days of the Federation, where a ship consisted of the saucer section, an engineering hull, and 2 warp nacelles. The saucer section contained primarily quarters for the crew, which upon her first launch was numbered at 203, but over time grew to 430 by 2270. The main bridge was also located in the saucer section, which could be found at the very top of the saucer. It should also be noted that the impulse drive is mounted to the aft of this section. The engineering hull, as you might expect given the name, housed the primary functions that allowed the ship to operate, such as, but not limited to, the warp core, main engineering, the shuttle bay, and the deflector dish. Last, but certainly not least, are the warp nacelles, which, as you might expect, are absolutely critical to achieving warp speed. The nacelles take energized plasma into their warp coils, and then use that to create a warp field around the ship, allowing for warp speed. A certain feature that all Constitutions shared, including the Enterprise, was the ability to detach the saucer section and engineering hull from each other. However, it has never been displayed at the time of this video, and any details about this are virtually non-existent, except for the fact that it should only be performed in emergency situations. Starfleet's core philosophy often emphasized peaceful exploration and diplomatic cooperation. However, experience taught them better than to leave their vessels unable to deal with dangerous threats, as much of the galaxy did not share their ideals. Despite these guiding principles, the Enterprise was well armed due to its designation as a heavy cruiser, and was equipped with phaser banks and a photon torpedo launcher, both located on the underside of the saucer, just above the lower sensor dome. But offense was only one aspect of survival in 23rd century ship combat, and the Enterprise was equipped with a powerful energy shield system that could absorb any kind of damage, be it physical or energy-based. Shields by the mid-23rd century were considered standard on all Starfleet ships, but it is likely, though perhaps not directly stated, that the shield strength of a Constitution would be greater than that of other ships in the fleet. When it comes to the Enterprise's speed in both warp and sublight environments, she was rated for a cruising speed of warp 6, with warp 8 and up being sustainable for only short bursts at a time. Sublight propulsion was achieved using impulse engines, which in the absolutely simplest terms expelled plasma to push the ship forward. This process was even able to generate a field effect that reduced the overall mass of the ship for greater maneuverability. With this in mind, the Enterprise at full impulse could achieve the speed of 1/4 the speed of light. Before we move on to the 2270s refit of the Enterprise, we must briefly cover the refit witnessed under Pike's command shortly after the Talos IV incident, which will be referred to in this video as the Discovery refit, for lack of a better term. This version of the Enterprise was outfitted with extra phaser arrays on both the top and bottom of the saucer section, with each side carrying 3 arrays configured in a semicircular pattern around the bridge and sensor dome. And unlike the other pre-2270 variants of the Enterprise, this version is confirmed to have a rear-facing phaser array at the edge of the hull lip leading to the main shuttle bay. At this point in time, she was also given 2 rear-facing photon torpedo launchers placed between the 2 impulse engines. The Disco refit also featured extra hull plating on the warp nacelles, whereas the pylons connecting the nacelles to the engineering were also changed to a more aerodynamic, wind-swept angle that would not be seen again until the post-2270 refit. It is unknown why the Discovery refit was done away with, in favor of a design that more closely followed the original Constitution class by the time of Kirk's 5-year mission. An out-of-universe explanation could be that the Disco refit is meant to be a retcon of the original Enterprise design, which in all honesty could be the likely case. But a possible in-universe explanation, which was hinted at upon Pike's temporary command of the USS Discovery, would suggest that newer technologies the Enterprise was outfitted with, such as the holographic communicator being the cause of a ship-wide systems malfunction, would have been deemed unreliable, and a downgrade of sorts could have been implemented by Kirk's time to technology that was older, but more reliable. Although I must admit this is more than a fair bit of speculation on my part, so take what I say about the refit and re-refit with a heavy grain of salt. I should also point out that Strange New Worlds has not finished its first season run as of the time I'm reading this out. So, if a reason is given for the discrepancy between Pike's Enterprise and Kirk's, I may have to come back to this topic briefly in an addendum video. By the time of the 2270s, after James Kirk's 5-year mission as captain of the Enterprise, every Constitution class that was serving in Starfleet had undergone, or was in the process of undergoing, a major refit and overhaul. This refit was so extensive that it had been seen as an entirely new ship being built on top of the structure of the old. Again, the core design aesthetics were kept: saucer section, engineering hull, and warp nacelles connected by 2 pylons. Starting with the saucer section, the old underside phaser bank and photon torpedo launcher were removed. Instead, the saucer was outfitted with 3 phaser arrays on the top side, and 3 on the bottom in a semicircular pattern reminiscent of the Disco refit. These new phasers, however, unlike their predecessor which fired 2 blue beams, fired 2 red-orange pulsed beams. The phasers could also draw power from the warp engines for extra damage potential. However, they were vulnerable to being rendered unusable if the warp engine sustained critical damage. The other major difference on the saucer section is the more pronounced design of the impulse engines attached, with a dome, possibly a fusion core like on the Miranda class, placed on top of the impulse system. The torpedo launcher was moved to the neck connecting the saucer and engineering hulls, with the entire structure housing the new torpedo bays jutting out of the neck. The next upgrade lied with the deflector, just below the torpedo bay, fully integrated into the engineering hull. The deflector dish, unlike previous iterations which looked like a physical satellite dish facing outward, this upgraded version was a round structure inset into the hull that emanated a strong blue light. But perhaps the biggest change was with the warp nacelles, which abandoned the old tubular design in favor of a more aerodynamic and thinner shape. Certain external components, such as the intercoolers and the matrix tuning and restoration coils, were internalized within the structure of each nacelle. Finishing off the upgrades is the design of the new nacelle pylons themselves. In the 2270 refit, the engineers returned to the swept-back design found in the Discovery refit, although in this case, it was a solid mass with no speed holes in the center. With the new lease on life, the Enterprise would go on to distinguish herself again, the refit doing nothing to temper her abilities, especially with now Admiral Kirk at the con. Despite an accelerated launch, the Enterprise and her crew would inaugurate the refit by solving the V'ger incident, which was then subsequently followed by a new 5-year mission of exploration under Kirk's command. Upon its conclusion, the Enterprise would then become a training ship for cadets from Starfleet Academy. But a figure from the past, Khan Noonien Singh, had returned, seeking vengeance upon Kirk and the Enterprise for abandoning him and his followers on a planet that quickly became uninhabitable. In his blood-sworn fury, he hijacked the USS Reliant as they were searching for a suitable planet for the Genesis project. With the ship under Khan's command, he embarked on a plan to bring him face-to-face with his hated enemy. And in a climactic battle, Kirk and the Enterprise emerged victorious over the once former dictator. But the old girl had suffered tremendous damage in the battle, not the least of which was the loss of Commander Spock. And upon the Enterprise's return to Earth space dock, was slated for decommissioning due to her age and battle damage. Needing his ship one more time to resurrect his dead friend, Kirk and his loyal senior staff stole the Enterprise away to the Genesis planet, which was formed in the aftermath of the battle with Khan. Unfortunately, this was where the legacy of the original Enterprise would meet its end. Klingon Commander Kruge, captain of a bird of prey, had been furiously seeking any and all information about the Genesis project. This quest of his would eventually lead him to the newly formed Genesis planet, just as the Enterprise did the same shortly after. In the ensuing battle, the Enterprise was quickly overwhelmed, due to her extreme damage and crew of 5. But true to her legacy, she would not go silently into the night. As the majority of the Klingon crew boarded the Enterprise for its data on Genesis, Kirk and his crew beamed down to the surface of the Genesis planet and initiated the self-destruct. In her last act, as she burned up in the atmosphere, the Enterprise had given her crew a fighting chance at survival, which was all Kirk needed to turn the tables on the Klingons and commandeer their ship. But the Enterprise name would not die there, and Starfleet soon commissioned another Constitution under the Enterprise name, with her serial number being NCC-1701, Alpha. Once launched in 2287, she would embark on a mission to Narendra 3, that would lead them to being the first ship to breach the barrier surrounding the galactic core to search for Sha-Ka-Ree, the mythical place said to be the origin point for all creation. Following that, she would begin another long-term exploration mission that culminated in her protection of the Khitomer Peace Accords from rogue elements in both Starfleet and the Klingon Empire who wished to see the hostilities continue. Unbeknownst to the crew, however, this was her last adventure, as the Enterprise would be ordered to return to space dock for decommissioning, just as they were celebrating the newly created Khitomer Accords. Captain Kirk and her bridge crew initially balked at the orders, but knew they would eventually have to comply. But not before Kirk decided to take the Enterprise out for one last joyride to the second star to the right, and straight on till morning.